For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the life I was living felt entirely my own. The year following my victory in forcing the sale of our house was a quiet, deliberate restoration. While I used my share of the proceeds to build a fortress of peace in a new sunlit condo, my ex-husband, Greg, was left stewing in the wreckage he had created. Stripped of the home he thought he owned and abandoned by the mistress he'd chosen over me, he was a man with nothing left but his shattered pride and a bottomless sense of grievance. I had foolishly mistaken his silence for acceptance, believing our war was over. I hadn't yet realized he was simply reloading, preparing to prove that a man who has lost everything believes he is owed anything. At 49, I felt as though I was finally breathing again after years of holding my breath. The constant low-level anxiety of living with my ex-husband, Greg, a man whose ego required more maintenance than a vintage car, was gone. The cloying presence of his mistress, Bridget, a woman whose ambition was as cheap and as shiny as her costume jewelry, was a fading, pathetic memory. My relationship with my son, Darius, was slowly, cautiously healing. The partition action, my quiet war against his father, had forced him to see the truth he had so long tried to ignore. He had seen his father's weakness, his betrayal, and he had seen his mother's quiet, unshakable strength. He called me every Sunday now, his voice no longer caught in the crossfire of his parents' conflict, but clear, respectful, and his own. He was starting to see me not just as his mother, but as a woman, a person with a life and a will of her own. Our conversations were still tentative, two people learning to navigate a new landscape, but they were real, and for that I was profoundly grateful. I had my work at the library, a quiet, orderly world of books and whispers that soothed my soul. I had my friends, women who had stood by me, who had celebrated my quiet victory with me over glasses of sweet tea and knowing smiles. I had my peace. A fragile peace, perhaps, but a peace I had earned with every ounce of my being. I had assumed that Greg, after his spectacular and public defeat, would have vanished from my life for good. He had been forced to sell the house he thought he owned, his share of the proceeds barely enough to cover the debts he had accumulated while living his high-flying life with Bridget. She, of course, had left him the moment the money ran out, her loyalty as flimsy as her designer blouses. The last I heard, Greg was living in a dreary rental complex across town, his flashy life reduced to a bitter, resentful memory. I felt no pity for him. I felt nothing. And that nothingness was the sweetest kind of freedom. But I had underestimated the depths of a narcissist's ego, the boundless capacity of a self-pitying man to reframe himself as the victim. The ghost of my past life arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not as a whisper but as a loud, official knock on my door. It was a courier, a young man with a bored expression, holding a thick, intimidating legal envelope. "Elaine Foster?" he asked. I nodded, my heart giving a slow, heavy thud of premonition. I signed for the package, my hand steady. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one overlooking the garden, and opened it. The words inside, printed on the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize, a firm known for its aggressive take-no-prisoners approach, were a declaration of a new, more insidious kind of war. It was a petition. My ex-husband, Greg Foster, was suing me. Not for the house, that battle was won. Not for assets, those had been legally and irrevocably divided. He was suing me for something so audacious, so breathtakingly arrogant, it was almost comical. He was suing me for spousal support. I read the words again, my mind struggling to process their meaning. He, the man who had cheated on me, who had left me for a younger woman, who had moved her into my home and treated me like an interruption to his grand new life, was now demanding that I, his wronged ex-wife, pay him a monthly stipend to maintain the lifestyle to which he had become accustomed. The petition was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. It painted him as the victim, a man left, destitute and in failing health, by the aggressive and vindictive actions of his former spouse. It claimed that my forced partition sale of our home had caused him profound emotional distress and financial ruin, leaving him unable to work, his health shattered by the stress of it all. It argued that I, now financially secure from the proceeds of that sale, had a legal and moral duty to support him. My initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, familiar fury. The man had no shame, no decency, no connection to reality. He had burned down our life together, and now he was trying to send me the bill for the ashes. I thought our war was over. I thought I had won my peace. But I was wrong. Greg had found a new weapon, a new way to try and drag me back into his chaotic, self-serving orbit. He was not just a ghost from my past. He was a vengeful one, determined to haunt me, to punish me for the one crime he could not forgive: my survival. I looked at the legal papers, at the mountain of lies and accusations, and I took a deep, steadying breath. The peace had been wonderful while it lasted. But I was Elaine Foster. And I knew how to fight. This pathetic, final gambit was a battle he was going to regret starting. The lawsuit was not just a legal document. It was a work of art. A masterpiece of manipulative fiction that belonged in a museum of audacious lies. I read it 3 times, my initial fury solidifying into a kind of cold, clinical fascination. Greg, with the help of his new ruthless lawyer, had managed to reframe his own profound betrayal as a tragedy in which he was the central suffering hero. According to the petition, I was not a wronged wife who had fought for her legal share of a marital home. I was a vindictive and emotionally unstable woman who had maliciously orchestrated a forced sale to render him homeless out of pure spite. His affair with Bridget was mentioned only in passing, dismissed as a brief, regrettable lapse in judgment, a symptom of his unhappiness in a cold and unfulfilling marriage. My years of managing our finances, of supporting his career, of raising our son, were completely erased, replaced by a narrative of me as a distant and unsupportive partner. The most galling part was the section on his declining health. The lawsuit claimed that the immense stress of the divorce and the loss of his home had led to a host of debilitating ailments: chronic fatigue, high blood pressure, a nervous condition that made it impossible for him to maintain gainful employment. He was, the document tearfully asserted, a broken man, his health and career shattered by my cruel and aggressive legal tactics. And the solution to his suffering? A monthly spousal support payment from me. A sum so large it was clearly designed not just to support him, but to punish me, to drain the very financial independence I had so recently, so triumphantly won. He wanted me to fund the lifestyle to which he had become accustomed, a lifestyle, I noted with a bitter laugh, that had been built on my own quiet sacrifices and his reckless spending. I immediately called my lawyer, Monica, her number now a familiar and comforting presence in my contacts list. I read her excerpts from the petition, my voice a monotone of disbelief. On the other end of the line there was a long, profound silence. Then I heard it, a low, dangerous chuckle. "Oh, he didn't," she finally said, her voice a mixture of amusement and pure, professional bloodlust. The sheer, unmitigated gall of that man. He's not just asking for support, he's trying to rewrite history, to legally sanctify his own pathetic victimhood. "Can he do this, Monica?" I asked, a flicker of genuine anxiety cutting through my anger. "Can he actually win?" "He can try," she said, her voice turning serious. "These kinds of nuisance suits are designed to do one thing. Wear you down. He knows you've just been through a terrible ordeal. He's betting you don't have the stomach for another long, ugly fight. He's betting you'll offer him a settlement just to make him go away. He's trying to extort you, Elaine, under the color of law." "I will not give that man another penny," I said, my voice as hard as stone. "I didn't think you would," she replied. "And you won't have to. This case is an insult to the court. But we have to treat it seriously. We will fight it and we will win. And then," she added, a note of satisfaction in her voice, "we will petition the court to have him sanctioned for malicious litigation and force him to pay every single cent of our legal fees." And so my fragile year-long peace came to an end. I was once again plunged into the world of legal strategy, of depositions, of a battle I had never asked for but was determined to win. Greg, true to his new role as a frail, broken man, began his performance in public. I heard from friends that he was seen around town leaning heavily on a cane, his face a mask of weary suffering. He would sigh dramatically in the grocery store line, regaling anyone who would listen with a vague, self-pitying story about his health troubles and his unfortunate financial setbacks. He was building his narrative, seeding the ground for his courtroom performance. His lawyer was a shark, just as Monica had predicted. He filed a blizzard of motions, demanding access to my private financial records, my medical history, anything he could use to try and paint me as a wealthy, heartless woman who had callously discarded her ailing, destitute husband. Monica and her team met his every move with a calm, professional efficiency, protecting my privacy, fighting his overreach at every turn. The battle was no longer about a house. It was about the truth. It was about my right to the peace I had so dearly won. Greg had made the biggest mistake of his life when he left me. He was about to make an even bigger one by coming back for more. He thought he could weaponize the legal system against me, twist the very concept of support into a tool of revenge. He had forgotten who I was. I was the woman who had built our life, balanced our books, and ultimately held the deed. I had won the first war with quiet, strategic precision. The second, more insidious war would be no different. He had declared himself a victim. I was about to prove he was nothing more than a fraud. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in a sterile, windowless conference room in Greg's lawyer's downtown office. The air was thick with a tense, adversarial energy. Greg sat across the long, polished table from me, a picture of manufactured frailty. He was dressed in a somber, ill-fitting suit as if to signal his newfound poverty. He leaned heavily on a polished wooden cane that I had never seen before, and his face was arranged in a mask of weary, noble suffering. It was a magnificent performance. His lawyer, a man named Mr. Davenport with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his cold, reptilian eyes, was a master of passive-aggressive intimidation. He began the deposition with a series of condescending questions about my own health, my emotional state, my motivations, for what he repeatedly termed the vindictive and aggressive sale of our marital home. "Mrs. Foster," he began, his voice dripping with a false sympathy, "you are a woman of considerable means now, are you not? The sale of the home on Chestnut Street left you with a rather substantial fortune." "The sale of my home," I corrected him calmly, my voice even, "left me with the equity I was legally entitled to after my ex-husband abandoned our marriage for another woman." Monica, my lawyer, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Davenport's smile tightened. "Be that as it may," he continued, "you are financially secure. Mr. Foster, on the other hand, as a direct result of the dissolution of your assets, has been left destitute. Is that not correct?" "Mr. Foster," I replied, my gaze steady, "is responsible for his own financial situation." For hours he grilled me. He tried to twist my words, to paint me as a cold, calculating, and vengeful woman. He brought up my new condominium, my part-time job at the library, even the modest donation I had made to the Women's Legal Fund, attempting to frame them as evidence of a lavish, carefree lifestyle I was enjoying at my ex-husband's expense. "So, while Mr. Foster was struggling to pay his rent, you were redecorating?" he asked with a sneer. "I was building a new life, Mr. Davenport," I said calmly. "Something your client is also free to do." The most difficult part was listening to Greg's own testimony. He spoke in a weak, trembling voice, recounting a fabricated tale of woe. He spoke of his failing health, the crushing stress that made it impossible for him to work. He described his life of supposed poverty, of skipping meals, of being unable to afford his blood pressure medication. He even had the audacity to weep, dabbing at his dry eyes with a handkerchief, as he spoke of his deep, abiding love for me and his heartbreak at my unforgiving nature. It was a performance so shameless, so utterly divorced from reality, that I almost had to admire his commitment to the lie. I sat there, my hands folded calmly in my lap, and I let him speak. I let him weave his tapestry of self-pity and deceit, knowing that every word he uttered was a thread in the noose he was tying for himself. Then came the questions about his ex-mistress, Bridget. "My client's brief, regrettable affair with Ms. Bridget," Davenport intoned, "was a symptom of his deep unhappiness, an unhappiness caused by years of emotional neglect from Mrs. Foster. He ended it immediately upon realizing his mistake. Why? I knew for a fact, through a snippet of gossip from my son Darius, that Bridget had been the one to leave Greg, her interest in him vanishing as soon as the money from the house sale did not materialize in his bank account as he had promised her. The deposition was a grueling, emotionally draining ordeal. They were trying to humiliate me, to break me, to paint me as the villain in a story where I had been the primary victim. They were trying to use the law to punish me for the crime of simply winning. As we left the office that day, stepping out into the cold afternoon air, Monica squeezed my arm. "You were magnificent, Elaine," she said, her voice full of a quiet, fierce pride. "You did not rise to their bait. You were calm, dignified, and unshakable." "They are trying to turn my victory into a defeat, Monica," I said, a weary sigh escaping me. "They are trying," she agreed. "But they will fail. Their entire case is built on his performance as a frail, destitute man. And performances, she added, a sharp, dangerous glint in her eye, can be exposed. We just need to find the one piece of evidence that proves he is not the man he claims to be. I knew she was right. Their case was a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and crocodile tears. But it was a house that could still do immense damage if we couldn't find a way to blow it down. I went home that night feeling not defeated but determined. The battle had been joined. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that there was a truth out there, a fact, a piece of evidence, that would expose my ex-husband's pathetic, greedy gambit for the sham that it was. I just had to find it. The weeks following the deposition were a tense, quiet stalemate. Greg's lawyer, Mr. Davenport, had successfully created a narrative, however flimsy, of my ex-husband as a broken, ailing man, a narrative we now had to legally dismantle. Monica, my lawyer, assured me that his case was built on lies, but she also warned me that in divorce court, appearances and sympathies could sometimes carry an unfortunate weight. We needed more than just my word against his. We needed hard, undeniable proof that Greg's performance of poverty and frailty was a complete and utter sham. The answer, the key to unlocking the truth, came from the most unexpected and for me the most heartbreaking of sources. My own son, Darius. Our relationship since the sale of the house had been a slow, careful process of rebuilding. He had been so caught in the middle of his parents' conflict, his loyalty so torn, that he had retreated into a shell of neutrality that had, at times, felt like its own kind of abandonment. But since I had won my independence, since the dust had settled, he had started to come around again. The phone calls were more frequent, his visits to my new condo longer, our conversations more honest. He was seeing his father's character and mine with a new, adult clarity. And he was racked with guilt. "I should have stood up for you, Mom," he'd said to me one afternoon, his voice full of a shame that was painful to witness. "When Dad brought Bridget into the house when they were treating you like a ghost. I should have said something. I was a coward." "You were a son caught between two parents," I'd replied gently. "It was not your battle to fight." But now it seemed he had decided to choose a side. He called me one evening, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Mom," he began, "can I come over? There's something I need to tell you. Something you need to know for the lawsuit." He arrived an hour later, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. He sat at my small dining table, unable to meet my eyes. "Dad has been calling me," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Every day. He's been coaching me on what to say if I get called to testify." My heart went cold. "Coaching you how, Darius?" "He wants me to lie," he said, his voice cracking. "He wants me to tell the court that he's been sick for years. That he's been depressed, unable to work, ever since the divorce. He wants me to say that you were always cold to him. That you controlled all the money. That you pushed him away." He finally looked at me, his eyes shining with tears. "It's all lies, Mom. All of it." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I know, baby. I know. But that's not all," he continued, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "He's not broke, Mom. Not really. He's been getting money from Bridget." I stared at him, stunned. "Bridget? His mistress? I thought she left him." "She did," Darius said. "But I guess she felt guilty. Or maybe he manipulated her too. I don't know. But he's been meeting her secretly. She's been giving him cash. Thousands of dollars. He told me not to tell anyone. He said it was just a loan between friends, that it didn't count as income." He shook his head in disgust. "He's hiding assets, Mom. He's committing perjury." Then came the final devastating blow. "And he's not sick," Darius said, his voice now a low, angry growl. "He's not frail. I followed him last weekend. He told me he was going to a specialist across town. He went to the country club. The one he always loved. He pulled out his phone. I saw him, Mom. And I took pictures." He slid the phone across the table. I looked at the screen and my breath caught in my throat. There was my ex-husband, Greg, my frail, destitute ex-husband who was suing me for spousal support, dressed in pristine white tennis shorts and a polo shirt, his face flushed with exertion, a wide, triumphant grin on his face as he executed a perfect backhand on the country club tennis court. Another photo showed him laughing with his friends at the clubhouse bar, a beer in his hand. The evidence was undeniable. It was a complete, utter refutation of every single lie he had told, every pathetic performance he had given. "Darius," I whispered, my own eyes now filling with tears, tears of gratitude for my son's courage. "Do you understand what you are doing? If you testify to this, your father, he will never forgive you." He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze steady, his father's chin set with a new hard resolve. "I know," he said. "But he's not the man I thought he was. And you are everything I thought you were, Mom. Strong. Honest. I should have taken your side a long time ago. I'm taking it now." He forwarded the photos, the text messages from Greg coaching him on what to say, the bank slips he'd found showing the transfers from Bridget, all to my lawyer's secure server. It was a complete dossier of his father's deceit, delivered by his own son. The guilt that had been his burden had been transformed into a weapon he was now handing to me. The lawsuit was no longer just my fight. It was ours. And Greg, my arrogant, deceitful ex-husband, had no idea that his own son, his own flesh and blood, was about to become the star witness for the prosecution, the one who would ensure his final, spectacular and well-deserved downfall. The day of the spousal support hearing, the air in the courtroom was thick with a tense, almost theatrical anticipation. Greg was already there when I arrived with Monica, my lawyer. He sat beside his own counsel, Mr. Davenport, looking the part of the tragic victim to perfection. He was dressed in a drab, slightly oversized gray suit, his shoulders slumped, the polished wooden cane he now used everywhere resting against his chair. He occasionally gave a small, pained cough into a handkerchief. It was a masterful performance. He did not look at me. His lawyer, Davenport, presented their case with a flourish of self-pitying drama. He painted a picture of Greg as a once vibrant man, titan of industry, now reduced to a state of poverty and ill health, all due to the callous and vindictive actions of his wealthy ex-wife. He presented affidavits from Greg's friends attesting to his profound depression and financial struggles. He concluded with a tearful plea for the court to grant his client the support he so desperately needed and so rightfully deserved. Then Greg took the stand. He was magnificent. He spoke in a weak, trembling voice, his hand often going to his chest as if to quell a sudden pain. He spoke of his love for me, of his heartbreak at our divorce, of his inability to sleep, to work, to find any joy in life. He spoke of his mounting medical bills, his loneliness, his fear for the future. He wept. Real tears. He was so convincing I almost felt sorry for him myself for a fleeting, insane moment. When it was Monica's turn to cross-examine him, she approached him with a gentle, almost sympathetic demeanor. "Mr. Foster," she began softly, "you have painted a very bleak picture of your current situation. You state that due to your poor health, you are unable to engage in any strenuous physical activity. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Greg whispered, his voice full of a tragic frailty. "My doctor has advised against it. I can barely walk to the corner store some days." "I see," Monica said, her voice full of a false compassion that was a work of art. "So, an activity like, say, a vigorous game of tennis, that would be completely out of the question for you?" Greg's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of panic in their depths. "Tennis? Good heavens, no. I haven't been on a tennis court in years." "Is that so?" Monica murmured. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to present Exhibit A." She placed a series of large, glossy photographs on the evidence projector. The first was a crystal-clear image of Greg, my frail, ailing ex-husband, lunging for a backhand on the sun-drenched tennis court of the Oak Ridge Country Club, his face a mask of exertion and competitive glee. The date stamp on the photo was from the previous Saturday. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Greg stared at the photo, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. His lawyer, Davenport, shot to his feet, sputtering objections. "Your Honor," he cried, "this is an invasion of privacy. It proves nothing." "On the contrary, Your Honor," Monica said calmly, "I believe it proves that the witness is committing perjury." She then presented the other photos. Greg laughing at the clubhouse bar, Greg carrying his own golf bag, Greg looking as healthy and as vibrant as ever. The judge stared at the photos, then at Greg, her expression one of utter, undisguised contempt. But Monica wasn't finished. "Mr. Foster," she continued, her voice now like cracking ice, You also claim to be destitute, living on the edge of poverty, is that correct? Yes, Greg mumbled, his gaze fixed on the damning photograph. Then perhaps you can explain these? Monica said, producing a new set of documents. These are bank statements, Mr. Foster, showing a series of regular, substantial cash deposits into your account from a Ms. Bridget Thorne, your former associate. Can you explain the source of this income you failed to disclose to the court? Greg was speechless. He just sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, his carefully constructed performance of victimhood utterly, completely destroyed. Your Honor, Monica said, turning back to the judge, it is clear that the plaintiff has not only fabricated his health condition but has also deliberately concealed income in a fraudulent attempt to extort spousal support from my client. She paused, then delivered the final devastating blow. The defense calls its final witness, Mr. Darius Foster. The courtroom doors opened and my son Darius walked in. He was dressed in a simple, neat suit, his face pale but his expression resolute. He walked to the witness stand, not looking at his father but giving me one small, reassuring nod. Greg stared at him, his face a mask of pure, horrified betrayal. Darius, he whispered, his voice a raw croak. And then my son, my brave, conflicted son, took the stand, swore an oath on the Bible, and in a clear, steady voice he told the truth. He told the court about his father's lies, about his coaching, about the hidden money, about the entire vicious, fraudulent scheme. He provided the text messages, the bank slips, the final, undeniable proof of his father's deceit. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to do, I knew. To testify against his own father. But it was also the bravest. He had finally, after years of silence, chosen a side. He had chosen my side. He had chosen the truth. And in that moment, as I watched him speak, my heart, which had been so full of sorrow, swelled with a new, fierce and powerful love. The battle was over. And we had won. The judge, a woman whose face had become a thundercloud of righteous fury during my son's testimony, did not take long to deliver her verdict. She looked down from her bench, her gaze fixed on my ex-husband Greg, who now seemed to have shrunk into his ill-fitting gray suit, a pathetic, defeated man. Mr. Foster, Judge Hernandez began, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. In all my years on this bench, I have rarely witnessed a more blatant, more malicious and more frankly insulting attempt to defraud this court and abuse the legal system. You have not only lied under oath repeatedly and without remorse, but you have done so in a craven attempt to extort money from the very woman you wronged, the woman whose life you chose to dismantle for your own selfish pursuits. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent courtroom. Greg just stared at his hands, his face ashen. Your petition for spousal support, she declared, her voice like the crack of a gavel, is not just denied, it is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, this court finds that you have engaged in malicious prosecution and have committed perjury. I am referring this entire case to the district attorney's office for review and potential criminal charges. A small, sharp gasp escaped from Greg's lawyer. Criminal charges. The war Greg had so arrogantly started was not just over. It was about to escalate into a catastrophe of his own making. But the judge wasn't finished. And finally, she said, her gaze shifting to Monica, my lawyer, given that this entire proceeding was a bad-faith, frivolous lawsuit designed to harass and financially drain the defendant, I am ordering you, Mr. Foster, to pay for 100% of Mrs. Elaine Foster's substantial legal fees. He looked at Monica. Submit your full billing to the court, counselor. I will sign the order myself. It was a total, comprehensive, and utterly devastating defeat for Greg. He had come into this courtroom seeking to punish me, to take my money, to ruin my peace. He was leaving with nothing but his own shame, the threat of jail time, and a mountain of new debt, owed directly to the legal team of the woman he had tried to destroy. As the judge adjourned the court, Greg finally looked at me. His eyes were not filled with hatred, not anymore. They were filled with a look of pure, hollowed-out bewilderment, the look of a man who has lost a game he didn't even know he was playing. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, my arm linked through my son's. Darius was quiet, his face still pale from the ordeal of testifying against his father, but he stood a little taller, a new hard-won integrity in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered as we walked. I'm so sorry it came to this. Don't be sorry, Darius, I said softly, squeezing his arm. Be proud. You did the right thing today. You chose the truth. Your grandfather would have been very, very proud of you. Our relationship, which had been so fractured, so full of unspoken hurts, had been forged anew in the fire of this final battle. We had faced down his father's lies together, and we had emerged on the other side stronger, more honest, a real family again. The aftermath of the hearing was swift. Greg, facing financial ruin and potential criminal charges, disappeared. He sold what little he had left and moved to another state, a disgraced man retreating from the wreckage of his own making. Bridget, his mistress, the catalyst for so much of this pain, was long gone, a footnote in a story that had ended so disastrously for him. My own life, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, was finally, truly my own. The cloud of Greg's bitterness, of his endless, grasping need, was gone. My peace, the peace I had fought so hard for, was now secured, protected by a court of law. A few weeks later, I sat with Monica in her office, signing the final papers. "You know, Elaine," she said, a small, satisfied smile on her face, "in all my years I've never seen a man so thoroughly, so completely outmaneuvered. He thought he could use the law as a weapon against you. And he did," I replied, a small smile of my own. "He just forgot that I was the one who had written the book on strategy." My victory was not a loud one. It was a quiet, legal checkmate, a final, definitive closing of a painful chapter. My relationship with my son was healing, built now on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. My finances were secure. My home was a sanctuary of peace. He had said he regretted marrying me. But as I sat in my quiet living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, a cup of tea in my hand, I knew with an unshakable certainty that the one thing Greg Foster now regretted more than anything else in his entire foolish life was the day he so arrogantly, so stupidly decided to divorce me. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying spousal support I could ever imagine.